There's a kitchen in Kyoto where the same iron pot has simmered rice for over 280 years, and no one has ever scrubbed it clean. The first time the pot was placed over charcoal, in the year 1741, the family matriarch wiped its interior with a cloth dampened in salt brine. She did not rinse afterward. She let the salt dry into a thin film over the iron, a living barrier that would grow thicker with every passing season. The pot was not yet dark. It was raw, grey metal, timid, waiting to become something more. That first meal was a simple rice porridge with pickled plum, fed to a child recovering from a winter fever. The family remembers that detail not because it was written down, but because the pot remembers it. Every grain of rice that stuck to the walls, every bubble of starch that burned onto the lip, every layer of oil from the plum that soaked into the iron, they remain, stacked like pages in a book no one can open, but everyone can taste. And this is the beautiful part. The women who tended that pot did not consider it unwashed. They considered it alive. The pot had a temperament, a memory, a voice that only revealed itself through flavor. If you asked them why they never used soap, they would laugh and ask you why you would erase a recipe that took 3 centuries to write. The rice that was never meant to be wasted is not about thrift in the way we understand it. It is not about stretching ingredients to save pennies. It is about the understanding that every meal leaves a fingerprint, and that fingerprint becomes the foundation for the next meal, and the next, and the next. When you remove that fingerprint with detergent, you reset the conversation between fire and iron. If this idea of a pot holding memory speaks to you, stay with this channel. We will keep uncovering the quiet lives of objects that hold our food. And tell us in the comments, what is the one meal you wish your pot could never forget? Stay with me here, because what happens next shifts everything. In the year 1952, an American food scientist named Harold McGee began analyzing the lipid residues in old iron pots from rural Japan. He expected to find nothing but carbonized food waste, the kind of grime that modern sanitation would consider a hazard. What he found instead was a complex matrix of polymerized fats, mineral salts, and trace proteins that had transformed into a non-stick surface far more stable than anything Teflon could produce. But here is the detail most people miss. The pot from Kyoto contained residues of rice starch from at least 12 distinct varieties, some of which had gone extinct in the intervening centuries. The pot was not just a cooking vessel. It was an archive of agricultural history, a seed bank of lost flavors that no botanist had catalogued. If you have ever scraped a pan and wondered what flavor you were washing away, you know the quiet guilt of erasing a meal's ghost. That guilt is not irrational. It is the memory of a time when every pot was a living record, and every meal was a conversation with every meal that had come before. The Japanese tradition of kizushi, the intentional seasoning of ironware, is not about making the pot last longer. It is about making the pot remember more. Each seasoning cycle, a thin layer of oil, a low flame, A patient wait is an act of recording. The pot learns the shape of your fire, the rhythm of your stirring, the personality of your salt. A chef in Kyoto, who has never washed his earthen Nabe for 20 years, once described the first meal it ever held. He was 23, just out of culinary school, and he made a mistake. He added too much water to the rice. The porridge was thin, flavorless, and he was ashamed. But he did not throw it away. He ate it, and then he let the pot cool slowly. And he never forgot that evening. 20 years later, every batch of rice that came from that pot carried a faint note of humility, the flavor of a lesson learned. This is where it gets interesting. The Korean tradition of jangdok, the ceramic vessels used for fermenting soy sauce and pastes, operates on the same principle. A jangdok that has held soybean paste for 50 years develops a resident microbiome that no lab can replicate. The pot becomes a living culture, a colony of bacteria and fungi that transforms every new batch of ingredients into something older than the person who prepared it. Notice what happens next. The rice that was never meant to be wasted is not about the rice at all. It is about the container. The pot is the patient ingredient, the one that does not get consumed, the one that accumulates wisdom while everything else is devoured. And yet, modern kitchens have trained us to fear accumulation. We scrub our pans to a sterile shine, believing that bare metal is pure and that patina is contamination. We throw away the crust, the fond, the stuck-on bits that carry the concentrated memory of the meal. We pour wine into the pan to deglaze, which is a beautiful ritual. But then we rinse the pan immediately after, erasing the very history we just coaxed out. Before we uncover what that Kyoto pot remembers from its first winter, stay with me. Let us explore what science says about the flavor of time. Lipid polymerization, the process that builds a seasoning layer on iron, is not a simple accumulation of grease. It is a chemical transformation in which unsaturated fats oxidize, cross-link, and form a solid film that is hydrophobic, stable, and resistant to heat. The reaction requires time, temperature, and repetition. 3 factors that modern cooking has streamlined into irrelevance. A pan that has been seasoned for 10 years has a different surface chemistry than a pan seasoned for 1 year. The long-chain polymers become more densely packed, more inert, more protective, but they also become more expressive. When new oil is added, it does not simply sit on top. It integrates into the existing matrix, bonding with older layers, carrying the thermal history of every meal that contributed to the structure. If this made sense instantly, it is because you already knew. Some people hear this and ignore it. You are not that person. You sensed that the crust on your grandmother's cast iron skillet had value even when everyone else told you to scrub it off. You felt that the dark gradient on a well-used wok was not dirt, but character. The rice that was never meant to be wasted is both a literal and a metaphorical truth. Literally, every grain that sticks to the pot after cooking is not waste. It is the beginning of the next seasoning layer. It carbonizes into a thin deposit that seals the iron, that protects it from rust, that gives the next batch of rice a subtle toasty note that no amount of fresh oil can imitate. Metaphorically, every meal that passes through a pot leaves an emotional residue. The pot knows when it held a feast and when it held a funeral. It knows when the cook was distracted and the rice burned. It knows when the cook was patient and the rice turned out perfect, fluffy, each grain separate and shining. So if modern hygiene screams, wash it, and ancient grandmothers whispered, keep it, which side carries the flavor? Write this in the comments. At what point did this start feeling personal? Because the truth is, the pot does not care about your opinion. It will hold whatever you give it. If you scrub it bare, it will forgive you and begin again. If you let it darken, it will deepen. The pot has no judgment, only patience. It is the one object in your kitchen that will outlive you, and it knows this. It waits for you to understand that every meal you cook is a lesson you are teaching it, and every lesson will be passed on to the next hands that hold it. The Kyoto pot, the one that has simmered rice for 280 years, is not a museum piece. It is used daily. It sits on a gas flame in a tiny kitchen that faces a mossy courtyard. The woman who tends it now is the 7th generation of her family to do so. She does not weigh her rice. She pours it by feel, lets the water run until it covers her first knuckle, and then she waits. She does not rush the boil. She lets the steam build slowly, watching the lid tremble. She listens for the change in sound, the shift from bubbling to gentle hissing, and then she kills the flame and lets the residual heat finish the work. The rice steams for exactly 14 minutes, and then she fluffs it with a wooden paddle that is itself older than the American Declaration of Independence. The pot has never met soap. It has never been scoured. It has been wiped with salt brine, rubbed with sesame oil, and left to cool with the lid slightly ajar. Its interior is black, glossy, reflective, not because it is clean, but because it is coated in 280 years of rice memory. And here is the detail that stops you. When she serves the rice, she does not scrape the pot clean. She leaves a thin layer of grains stuck to the bottom and sides. That layer is the seed for tomorrow. It will toast slightly from the residual heat, become part of the seasoning, and tomorrow's rice will absorb a faint echo of today's meal. She calls this layer the pot streams. In Japanese, the phrase is Nabe no Yume, and it is considered rude to disturb it. You never eat the last grain, not because you are saving it, but because you are honoring the pot's need to remember. The rice that was never meant to be wasted was never meant to be eaten at all. It was meant to stay, to become part of the vessel, to carry the lineage forward. When you finish your next meal, consider leaving that last grain. Save this video as a reminder of the tradition of Nabe no Yume, and come back for the next chapter of culinary memory. In the comments, tell us, have you ever left a grain behind on purpose? Every time you scrub a pot to bare metal, you erase a lineage. If you believe some pots deserve to keep their ghosts, share this video. Let others know that grime can be wisdom. And if you ever find a pot that has not met the soapy sponge in 50 years, listen closely. It may have a story worth tasting. Subscribe with Miso and let us keep the old recipes alive together. The pot sits on its shelf, dreaming of steam. In the morning, the great-granddaughter will lift it with both hands, wipe the night's dew from its rim with a salted cloth, and begin again. She will not think about 280 years of history. She will think about hunger. She will think about the rice that needs to be fed to the children before school. The pot will not remind her of its age. It will just do what it has always done. Hold heat, hold memory, hold the patience of women who understood that some things are not cleaned, but deepened. And that is the quiet truth that no laboratory can measure. The pot does not need you to understand its chemistry. It needs you to trust its surface. It needs you to stop seeing dark as dirty and start seeing dark as accumulated wisdom, pressed thin and hard by generations of flame and grain. When you finally set your own pot down on the counter tonight, look at what sticks to its walls. Let it stay. Let it cool. Let it become the foundation for tomorrow. The rice that was never meant to be wasted is not a lesson about thrift. It is a lesson about continuity. The pot knows exactly what it is doing. It has always known. The question is whether you will learn to listen before the last of the old pots turns to ash in a museum display, and all that remains is the hollow shine of new metal that remembers nothing at all.